Good evening and thank you for joining us. It's a feeling of deja vu for many small businesses here in Canada that rely on Canada Post, as workers are once again off the job. Today is day 2 of the second Canada Post strike in as many years.
It's just been a huge inconvenience. We've had to, and costly, we've had to find other carriers, and it's just slowed our process down.
She says this latest Canada Post strike affects about 20% of her sales.
We want to go to work!
This was a reaction because of the very strong likelihood that our jobs are under attack and our rights are being eroded through changes in business model that have not been consulted through the union.
The federal government says Canada Post is losing roughly $10 million every day, and the recently announced changes could save $400 million a year.
Last year, the strike cost small businesses $1 billion in lost sales and increased costs over the 4-week period. You can imagine this one's going to be just as significant.
Canada Post is collapsing before our eyes. The so-called crown jewel of Canadian public service is now bleeding out billions. Losses between $1 and $1.5 billion in a single year. And who's footing the bill? You are. Taxpayers. Families already crushed by inflation. Now told they must bankroll a failing postal dinosaur that hasn't been profitable since the mid-1990s. Mark Carney and his liberal friends promised to run it like a business. Instead, it's a circus. Billions vanish, service gets cut, and door-to-door delivery is scrapped. Meanwhile, the union demands 19% raises in veto power, and when Ottawa pushes back, they walk out, shutting down mail service across the country. This isn't just incompetence, it's a full-blown betrayal. And tonight, we dig into how Canada Post collapse exposes the failure of Carney's socialist experiment. Stick around, hit that like button, subscribe, and keep watching. The crisis at Canada Post isn't a surprise. It's the inevitable result of decades of denial, waste, and political spin. For years, executives issued reports warning that the system was broken. Mail volumes have collapsed since the 1990s as people moved to email, banking apps, and private couriers. But instead of modernizing, Canada Post kept hiring, kept expanding, and kept promising universal service. The result? A bloated monster delivering fewer letters to more addresses at skyrocketing costs. In 2025, the reality finally broke through the illusion. Losses between $1 and $1.5 billion sent shockwaves through Ottawa. Mark Carney tried to spin it as temporary, a rough year caused by inflation and global shocks, but insiders admitted it wasn't new. Canada Post hasn't turned a real profit in decades. The government has been patching the holes with subsidies, debt, and endless promises of reform. Now the patchwork has ripped wide open. The so-called solution? A federal bailout, funded by taxpayers already stretched to the breaking point. Billions funneled into a system that refuses to face reality. And to make it sting even more, the reforms attached to that bailout include ending door-to-door delivery for millions of Canadians. Imagine paying more for less service. Seniors, families, and small businesses suddenly told, sorry, walk to the community mailbox.
Canada Post is effectively insolvent. It provides an essential service to Canadians, and in particular to rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, and Canadians are rightfully attached to it and want it saved. However, repeated bailouts from the federal government are not the solution.
All while the bureaucracy at the top keeps cashing fat salaries. But here's the kicker. The union didn't just accept the bailout and reform plan. No, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, CUPW, went nuclear. Their demands: a jaw-dropping 19% wage increase and veto power over management decisions. Think about that. At a time when the corporation is collapsing, the union wants near-total control and massive pay hikes. It's not negotiation, it's extortion. And when management refused, the workers walked. A nationwide strike that paralyzed the mail system overnight. Businesses scrambled. Online retailers shifted to private couriers. Banks stopped relying on mail. Even government agencies were forced to use FedEx and UPS to move critical documents. For ordinary Canadians, it was chaos. Missed checks, delayed medicine, stalled bills, a basic service destroyed because a union thought it could hold the entire country hostage. And yet, the leadership in Ottawa didn't condemn the strike. Mark Carney gave his usual polished lines about dialogue and fairness. Translation, he had no plan. The man who once bragged about bringing discipline to public corporations suddenly went silent when the unions flexed their muscle. That silence told Canadians everything. This wasn't a government running a business. It was a government running cover for its allies. A government that would rather bail out failure than confront it. A government that cared more about keeping union bosses happy than protecting taxpayers. Canada Post CEO John Hamilton finally admitted the obvious in an interview. The model has been broken since at least 1994. That's more than 30 years of denial. 30 years of politicians kicking the can down the road, terrified of angering unions, terrified of telling the truth. And now, Canadians are paying the price. But the union rejected his warning outright. Instead of negotiating, they doubled down, demanding not just raises, but the power to veto changes to routes, delivery models, even modernization efforts. In other words, the very people who profit from inefficiency want the right to block efficiency. It's the definition of a death spiral, and here's where it gets worse. The strike and bailout don't just bleed taxpayers dry, they accelerate the decline. Businesses that once used Canada Post are gone for good. They won't come back after weeks of disruption. They've moved on to private couriers that actually deliver on time. Trust is shattered, and once it's gone, it doesn't return. By the time the dust settles, Canada Post may exist in name only, a hollowed-out shell that delivers junk flyers while real commerce bypasses it entirely. And Canadians, instead of having a strong public service, will be stuck paying for a zombie corporation that refuses to die. But that wasn't the whole story. What came next exposed not just Canada Post's failure, but the rotten foundation of Carney's entire economic vision. Mark Carney promised Canadians he would run public corporations like a business. But let's be clear, no real business loses billions every year, ignores market realities, and then demands customers pay more for less. That's not business. That's socialism with a fresh coat of paint. And the Canada Post disaster shows exactly where that path leads. Carney's leadership style has become predictable. Throw around buzzwords, dodge accountability, and hope the press covers for him. He talks about transitioning to digital while presiding over a postal system stuck in 1985. He brags about business discipline while unions shut down services at will. He preaches sustainability while forcing taxpayers to bankroll waste. And when the system collapses, he blames global headwinds, Donald Trump, or anyone but himself. Contrast that with Trump's approach. Love him or hate him, the man delivered results. He cut taxes, deregulated industries, and told companies flat out, build here or pay the price. Manufacturing jobs returned, energy production surged, and the economy moved forward. That's what leadership looks like. Clear rules, tough enforcement, and loyalty to your own citizens. Not endless excuses and bailouts. Meanwhile, in Canada, the ripple effects of the postal strike and bailout are spreading everywhere. Small businesses, already struggling with high interest rates and inflation, are losing customers as shipments vanish into thin air. E-commerce sellers, the lifeline of rural entrepreneurs, are jumping ship to UPS and Purolator. Pharmacies warn that patients could miss critical medications if the strike continues. And international investors are watching all this chaos and asking themselves, why put money into a country that can't even deliver its own mail? This is bigger than stamps and mailboxes. It's about trust. Once a nation's basic services collapse, people lose faith in everything else. If the government can't handle envelopes, how can it handle trade deals, energy projects, or national defense? The Canada Post meltdown is a symbol of broader decay. The strikes at Air Canada, the rail blockades, the endless public sector slowdowns. Different sectors, same disease. A country strangled by unions and smothered by bureaucrats, while leaders like Carney smile for the cameras and call it progress. And here's the danger. Every bailout, every capitulation to union demands, sets the stage for the next crisis. Why should any public sector union compromise when they know Ottawa will always cave? Why should management modernize when it's easier to pass the bill to taxpayers? This is the death spiral John Hamilton warned about. Services get worse, costs go up, businesses flee, and taxpayers lose faith. Eventually, the system collapses under its own weight. For ordinary Canadians, that collapse is already visible. Seniors forced to trek through snow to reach community mailboxes because door-to-door is gone. Families waiting weeks for bills or packages. Small-town newspapers folding because distribution costs are impossible. And through it all, union leaders stand at podiums demanding more power, more money, more vetoes, while Canadians lose jobs, services, and dignity. And the result is plain for everyone to see. Canada Post's collapse is more than just a postal story. It's a warning shot for an entire nation. When billions vanish, when unions paralyze services, and when leaders like Mark Carney shrug it off with empty speeches, the system itself is in freefall. Canadians are being forced to pay for failure while losing the very services they're promised. That isn't leadership, it's betrayal. But here's the choice. Keep propping up a broken socialist experiment or demand accountability. Demand real reforms. Demand leaders who put taxpayers, workers, and families first, not union bosses and bloated bureaucracies. Because if Canada Post can go bankrupt, what's next? Healthcare, energy, infrastructure? This is the moment to wake up, speak up, and push back. If you found this breakdown important, hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more hard-hitting analysis. The story isn't over, and you won't want to miss what comes next.